So we're talking today about organic chemistry, or you can call it the biochemistry of cells, and we're looking at carbon-based molecules. Carbon is the most important element in living things because it can make 4 bonds. 1, 2, 3, 4. That means you can make these long chains or long circles of carbon to carbon to carbon to carbon, and it can bond to all kinds of things. Look at all these bonds sticking out there. Each one makes 4 bonds, and so it can bond to all kinds of different things. If life were based on oxygen, it would be a little bit boring to make molecules because there's only 2 bonds. And so you could make long molecules, oxygen to oxygen to oxygen, but nothing would be able to attach to it because oxygen only makes 2 bonds. If you look at hydrogen, even more boring, it can only make 1 bond. And so that's not very good. You can't even make a long chain of those. All you can make is an H to another H. If you look at nitrogen, well, that's okay. That can make 3 bonds. So you could make nitrogen to nitrogen to nitrogen, but each one could only have one thing sticking out. Whereas carbon, wow, there's 2 things that can stick out of each side. So living things on this planet are based on carbon, because it can make so many different bonds, and you can make these really complex molecules with different atoms sticking out of them that have all kinds of different functions. And that way you can make an organism as complex as you, or as complex as an oak tree, or a worm, or a bacterium that have all kinds of different functions for all their different molecules. So here's an atom of carbon. The important thing about carbon is that it's got 6 protons in its nucleus. So if it's got 6 pluses, that means it's got to have 6 minuses on the 6 electrons. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 pluses, 6 protons inside, 6 electrons on the outside. Here's the important thing. The first energy level, we don't really count these electrons for bonding purposes because they're stable. The first energy level has 2 electrons, this one has 2, it's all set, it's all stable. The outside, though, I don't know if you remember this from our last unit, the outside can have up to 8 electrons. But right now, it only has 4. So how many left? 4. So this one could use a buddy. This one could use a buddy. That one could use a buddy, and that one could use a buddy. Right now there's 1, 2, 3, 4 electrons, but we could use 8 electrons in that outer shell in order to be stable. So that's why if it shared an electron here, shared an electron here, shared one here, and shared one here, that's how you get your 4 bonds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Although a cell is mostly water, the rest of the cell consists mostly of carbon-based molecules because they can form 4 bonds. And I need to define this now. Organic chemistry is the study of carbon compounds. So you need to have at least 2 carbons, and you should write that down. That's important. You need to have at least 2 carbons in order for it to be an organic chemical. The opposite is an inorganic chemical. Inorganic chemicals are things like water, H2O. No carbon at all. Or another inorganic molecule could be carbon dioxide, CO2. Only 1 carbon, it's still inorganic. That's the opposite of organic. Organic means you need at least 2 carbons. Don't confuse this with the way that we use the word organic for everything outside of this class. So if I say that there are organic oranges, that means the oranges were grown without pesticides or any other chemical compound, no hormones, all that stuff. In our class, carbon means just 2 atoms bonded together. So carbon has 4 electrons in its outer shell, and the outer shell should hold 8 electrons when it's stable. It has 4 because you have the 4 plus these 2, which make the 6 inside, so it's neutral. But again, you have only 1, 2, 3, 4 in the outer shell, but you could use 8, so that means 4 plus 4 more would make 8, and that would give you the 4 bonds. Carbon can share its electrons with other atoms. So this one can share an electron with some other atom over here. This one could share this electron with another atom here, maybe a hydrogen, maybe another carbon. We could share these electrons with another atom. And this one could share an electron with maybe another carbon or another hydrogen or whatever. So this gives you a sharing, 1 covalent bond. another pair of shared electrons. So the black ones belong to this carbon, and the orange or red ones belong to some other atom, either an oxygen, a carbon, a nitrogen, whatever. Here's another covalent bond because they're sharing electrons, and here's another covalent bond. So that gives us 4 covalent bonds. So carbon can make single bonds to other carbons. These two carbons are actually bonded. Whoops, sorry. These carbons are bonded so that they're sharing this pair of electrons and this pair, so that's called a double bond. When they share 3 pairs, that means 6 electrons, you get 1, 2, 3 bonds. That's a triple bond. There are some really complex molecules. Here's propane, and it's got 3 carbons with a whole bunch of hydrogens added on, and these are all of the bonds, the covalent bonds. Here's benzene, and it's a carbon ring. So sometimes you have carbon to carbon with a single bond, and sometimes you've got carbon to carbon with a double bond. But if you look at every carbon, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4 bonds. So these are called carbon skeletons because they're the basis of all the organic molecules. And these things are called chemical bonds, and that's when they're sharing electrons. The simplest type of carbon compounds are made out of carbon and hydrogen only. You don't have to memorize these, but here's methane. It's carbon with 4 hydrogens. This is the same thing shown a different way, and again, the same thing shown a different way. Carbon can use its bonds to attach to other carbons, as you see here. And the idea here is, wow, look at that molecule. It looks so much different from that molecule. So that's why carbon is really versatile. It can make all these different bonds to make all these different shapes. And the shape of the molecule is really important because it has a certain shape, and so it fits a certain way in with the cell, and it has a function because of the way that it fits. This forms an endless diversity of these carbon skeletons. That means the general shape of the molecule. And here's where the baby cries, because most of you were looking at all that stuff saying, oh my god, I can't do this, it's too hard. And I'm here to tell you it's not really that hard. What you need to remember really is that carbon can form 4 bonds, and because of that it makes these big, big, big molecules. That's what I want you to know so far. These large molecules are made out of hydrogen and carbon, and these are the main molecules in the fuel that we burn in our cars, and also in some of the foods that we eat, like fat molecules, for example. So here's the guy pumping gasoline into his car, which is made out of the gasoline's made out of hydrogen and carbon atoms bonded together, and the fat in French fries is mainly made out of carbon and hydrogen as well.